Hi, biology. In this lesson, we're going over the information from what is a virus. I know everyone's wondering that, right? The objective of this lesson is to compare and contrast viruses and living things using evidence, to describe the different ways viruses reproduce, and to describe how viruses cause disease. Remember, yellow star means a quick check question is being covered. Okay, so what is a virus? First, let's look at the characteristics of living things. So these are things that all living things have or do. All living things reproduce. All living things respond to stimuli. All living things evolve and change through time. All living things are made of cells. Cells are considered the basic unit of life. They use energy. They grow and develop, and all living things use the universal genetic code, so they have some sort of DNA or RNA. Now, viruses are not considered living. So we have this list of characteristics of life, and when we have something and we're trying to figure out if they're living or not, they have to go through a test. Do they have these characteristics? And viruses don't have those characteristics, which is why when you see a tree of life, viruses are not listed. We see bacteria and archaea, which is another type of single-celled organism. It's like a bacteria, if you will. These two are both prokaryotic groups, but viruses aren't. They're different from bacteria because they're not living. Bacteria have cells. This other group here, the eukarya, that's where we're in animals, fungi, plants, things that you're familiar with. So viruses are not in there because for several things. One big thing, they are not made of cells. They do not have cell membranes and don't have cells, and so they don't have organelles, so they're not. Gets them off the list of living things. They also don't respond to stimuli. They don't grow and develop in the way that we use that term. They do reproduce. They do make copies of themselves and make more of them, but they can't do it on their own. They have to be inside of another organism. They do evolve, so they change, they mutate. They can use energy, and they do use RNA and DNA. So they use that universal genetic code. So what is a virus? So viruses, again, no cell membrane. They're not considered living. Instead of a cell membrane, they have what's called a capsid. So in this picture, this would be the capsid, and then this whole thing right here is the capsid. And it's a protein coat is what a capsid is. And they do have genetic material. So some viruses have DNA and others have RNA. And if they have RNA, they're referred to as a retrovirus. HIV is an example, and we'll talk more about that in a little bit. Viruses can vary in shape and structure. These are two common shapes. So this like robot-looking one is a common bacteriophage. And the circular one, I mean, that's like think of a coronavirus. HIV is a circular virus, but they do vary in shape. They're very, very small. For a long time, we didn't even know what viruses were. They were kind of a mystery. It wasn't until the invention of the electron microscope that we were able to actually get images of viruses and know what they look like. And viruses are very specific. So they usually only infect one type of organism. And even then, they infect certain types of cells within the organism, like HIV. We mentioned HIV already, but HIV infects humans, but it infects our white blood cells specifically. A lot of the respiratory viruses, they affect our respiratory system cells specifically, so they're not attacking the white blood cells. All right, so let's look at some of the life cycles, the different life cycles of viruses that you can see. The two main types are the lytic infection and lysogenic infection. We'll start with the lytic infection. So in this picture, the green part represents a cell, and then it's a bacteria cell, so a single-celled organism that's a prokaryote, so its DNA is just kind of floating around in here. The virus attaches itself to the outside, and then it inserts its genetic material. So that capsid, that protein capsid, never goes into the cell. It just kind of floats away and then gets dissolved or broken down by something later. So once the genetic material is inside the cell, though, it starts taking over the cell. It uses the cell's enzymes and amino acids and energy to start making more copies of itself. So it's making more of the DNA, but it's also making more of the protein, because we just put some DNA, genetic material, in there. And remember, DNA has genes that code for protein. So it's using that sequence to make more protein to make the capsids. While it's doing that, it's breaking up the host genome, breaking up its DNA, so that cell is no longer functioning as a cell. It's just now like a little virus factory. Then the viruses will start to assemble, start to rebuild those capsids and put the genetic material inside the capsid, and then it will cause the cell to lyse, which means to break apart. And now a bunch of viruses will be released, and then they can go infect other neighboring cells. So that's the lytic infection. The lysogenic infection is somewhat similar, but it has an extra step. With the lysogenic infection, the DNA or RNA get inserted into the host cell, but instead of becoming active right away and killing that host cell, it actually becomes part of the host genome and will sit in there. And anytime that host cell divides, makes another copy, it will also make another copy of the virus. And at some point, something will trigger the virus to become active. And when it becomes active is when it starts to take over the host cell's machinery and make copies of the virus and infect other cells. Now, when the DNA is inside of the host DNA, it's referred to as a prophage or provirus. Your lesson uses the term provirus, but so the two seem very similar, prophage and provirus. Now these two might seem like, oh my gosh, two cycles, I have to remember both of them, but they're very, very similar, all right? They're pretty much the same thing, except one has an extra step. One has a dormancy stage. Now, how I remember which one is which is the one with the longer cycle, the one with the dormancy stage, has the longer word. That's nice, huh? So the lysogenic cycle is the longer cycle that has this extra step of dormancy, and it has the longer word, where the lytic cycle, the shorter cycle, the one that starts infecting right away, has the shorter word. Now, when the cell starts, when the virus starts infecting the cell and killing the cell, that's when an organism feels sick. I guess if you're a single cell organism, you feel more than sick, you're dead because your one cell just got bursted apart. But if you're a multicellular organism like us, when you have cells in your body that start to be broken apart and lysing, that's when there's a signal to your body like, oh, there's something wrong, I'm sick, and you will have an immune response, and your immune system will try and clear up and fight the infection, the virus. Now, we mentioned already HIV/AIDS, so just a couple other things. So this virus, as I said before, attacks your white blood cells specifically. It is a retrovirus, not meaning it's cool and retro, but that it has RNA instead of DNA. And for retroviruses, they have an extra step. The RNA that gets inserted has to be reverse transcribed to DNA before it can do most things. So these retroviruses do get reverse transcribed into DNA. HIV specifically is a lysogenic virus, so it becomes part of the host genome. And that's why we say HIV/AIDS. The virus name is HIV, okay? But if that virus becomes triggered and active, so you can have HIV and not be sick because it's just in your genome, it's in your white blood cells, it's just sitting there. But when it gets triggered to become active and it starts attacking your cells and your cells start lysing, that's when you develop AIDS. And one thing that's tricky with HIV/AIDS is that it specifically is attacking the white blood cells, which is part of the immune response. So what would normally be responding to you being sick is what's being attacked. And so it's harder for your body to fight AIDS. One thing I was going to mention about retrovirus or these lysogenic viruses is a good portion of our genome is actually remnant retroviruses, or not retroviruses, but lysogenic viruses that are just in our genome. They've mutated, so they're no longer active, but those sequences are there, which is pretty cool, I think. All right, so another thing just to touch base on and make sure you understand is that viruses mutate. Their DNA sequences change through time, just like our DNA sequences change. And they mutate at similar, at different rates. So some viruses mutate more than other viruses. So the flu virus, for example, a well-known studied virus, we know it mutates regularly and quickly. And that's why every year there's a new flu shot, because the virus changes so much that the previous year's flu shot will not be effective for the next year's flu. And there's people whose job is to follow the flu virus around the year and, kind of predict how it's going to mutate. Whereas there's other viruses like polio that does not mutate regularly. And that's why we get one shot for polio as a baby and we never have to get another shot. Right now, COVID, everyone knows about COVID right now, virus that we're dealing with. We're still learning do we need to have regular COVID shots? Maybe we will, we've got that booster that's coming out right now, but that's something to, as we learn more about this virus, we'll have to determine. So vaccines, those are things that we can do for viruses. So for bacterial infections, you don't use vaccines, but for viruses, because they are just DNA, RNA material for the most part, we can get anti-vaccines for them. And what the vaccine does is you're shooting a little piece of that virus, a modified piece. There's different types of vaccines, but basically you're giving yourself a little bit of the vaccine or the virus in some form. So that way your body gets familiar with it and has a small immune response and has antibodies for that virus. And antibodies are like your immune system's memory. So you can't get infected by the same thing more than once because it can get in your system, but your body recognizes it so quickly that it doesn't make you sick. And your body sees it, attacks it, and you don't even know, your immune system's just doing its job. So when you come and faced with a new virus and you get like a cold or something, your body attacks it, has antibodies, and you can't get the same cold again, though you could get a different cold. And that's another one that mutates so quickly. But it doesn't make you as sick as the flu or COVID. People aren't dying from the cold, but people can die from the flu and COVID, which is why we make vaccines for it. All right, we made it to the end. So your multiple choice question, which is not associated with a virus? Genetic material, cell membranes, lysogenic cycles, prophages. Which one of those terms is not associated with viruses? And that is, the answer is your code word for the video. Make sure you give the word, not just the letter. And let me know if you have any questions. We're here to help.